Good day, everyone. My name is Kathy Piquero, and the topic that I'm going to tackle today is about research method in medical sociology. Research method in medical sociology uses a variety of data collection techniques. We'll skip the details, but we feel that a quick outline of the ways of techniques. Contemporarily, medical sociologists find data might helpful in sociology. On the other hand, let's proceed to data collection. The example of data collection here is the questionnaires. Questionnaires are used in all types of research, ranging from in-person interviews to simple online survey. Questionnaire, and there is an entire chance or science about developing from way that will provide the chances of actually getting respondents to answer the questions. And let's proceed to experimental and quasi-experimental method. What is an experimental and quasi-experimental method? Are less common but still provide useful information for medical sociologists. The experimental method have been used to good effects. For an instance, it exploited real-world innovation that randomly affects group of people more so than others. Then let's proceed again to non-experimental method. What is non-experimental method? Surveys that collect information with questionnaires are the most common source of data in sociology. The non-experimental, for example, the survey that I'm going to mention is the General Social Survey, or so-called the GSS, is one of the example of the non-experimental method. Let's proceed to a quantitative method. What is a quantitative method? Quantitative method is a numerical array of data, typically consists of columns representing study variables and rows containing observation and variables. The quantitative data, for example, if we collected information about years of schooling from a sample of 100 adults, then each of the 100 rows would contain the education of single participants. Let's proceed again to interviews. What is interviews? Interviews are common use in sociology, ranging from a unstructured, where the researcher may enter the conversation of a topic. Interviews, it is a reason try to select a particular person to structure, because the example here is unstructured. Then let's proceed to ethnographic method. What is ethnographic method? Primarily about observing and participating in social world, which allows the researcher to scholarly and folk understanding. The ethnographic method, for example, a classic medical sociologist observe healthcare organizations, programs, and medical trainings to understand how doctors are socialized to provide care in particular ways. Generally, a particular research investigation tries to determine whether and to what degree an independent variable is influencing a dependent variable. Thus, if we say poverty affects health, in this example, poverty is independent variable, while dependent variable that is affected by or influenced by another variable is so-called the independent variable. Here are my examples of independent variable and dependent variable. poverty and health. The poverty is the cause and the health is the effect. In these two kinds of variables, only independent variables can be manipulated. And to change the outcomes, you should change first the independent variable. And that is my discussion about research method and medical sociology.
So, the practice is human art of healing, requiring trust and empathy. Evidence-based medicine is a means to ration access scientific and mostly quantitative, qualitative research, surveys, non-experiment, and experimental. Surveys with random and non-sampling. In addition, medical sociology is concerned with the relationship between social factors in health and the application of sociological theory and research techniques to questions related to health and the healthcare system.
To discuss more about our topic, surveys are very common in medical sociology. They are conducted via face-to-face interviews, over the telephone, or increasingly via the internet and decreasingly via snail mail. However, surveys are conducted. They enable researchers to gather much information on the many topics that are included in the typical questionnaire. So in medical sociology, surveys are useful in terms of gathering informations more likely about health informations, health status, and personal attitudes. For example, the current pandemic, the Department of Health conducts survey on every health institution to update the current situation of the state. So let us hear more about what is random sampling and non-random sample of the next reporter.
For the continuation of the discussion of Ms. Jury about survey, we all know that we are all familiar what is survey is all about because we are conducting some research. One of the most popular and simple data collection that used in research field is no other than the random sampling. Random sampling, or also known as probability sampling, is a sampling method that allows the randomization of sample selection. Each sample have the same probability as other samples to be selected to serve as the representation of the entire population. For example, during the ongoing pandemic, random sampling was used to estimate the prevalence of COVID-19 in the population, providing insights into the spread of the virus and the level of immunity in different regions. Health authorities randomly selected individuals from the population and conducted antibody tests to determine if they had previously been infected with the virus. The aim of this is to obtain the representative sample that reflected the overall population. The finding from these samples help estimate the percentage of the individual infected and develop antibodies, which in turn inform public health policies and strategies. That's why those times there are policies and strategies that health authorities have implemented. For more information, there are 4 types and primary types of random sampling method. First is the simple random sampling. Is the randomized selection of a small segment of individuals or members from a whole population. Simple random sampling is one of the most convenient sampling method. For example, if you wanted to conduct a survey in a school of 1,000 students and you wanted to sample of 100 students, you could use simple random sampling by assigning each student a number from 1 to 1,000, then using random number generator to pick the 100 numbers. The students assigned those numbers would be ones you survey. The second method is the systematic sampling. Systematic sampling is a selection of specific individuals or members from an entire population. The selection often follows a predetermined interval. The systematic sampling method is comparable to simple random sampling. For example, if you were conducting a survey in a cafeteria, You could give a survey to every sixth customer that comes into the cafeteria. What makes the sample systematic? The sampling systematic because there is an interval happen.
Now, let's proceed one of the types of random. So, first, the third is the stratified sampling, which includes the partitioning of population into subclasses with notable distinctions and variances. It involves dividing the population into distinct subgroups. So, if we can see the stratified sampling, it is a tool of coin which is selected to divide into a smaller groups to filter the target respondents of what are those suitable that the respondents can answer the questions provided by the researcher and to sustain the needs of your research by answering the conclusion and all. So the last one is the cluster sampling, which similar to the stratified sampling method includes dividing a population into subclasses. Each of the subclasses should portray comparable characteristics to the entire selected sample. So same with the stratified sampling, they are divided into groups. But the cluster is a presentation, even though it is divided or select into groups, so it should be the presentation of the whole population. So for example of the cluster is, in your study is you're focusing on the using the internet connection, but the cluster identified who will be using the data or who will be using the Wi-Fi. So there are same divided into groups. But again, the cluster can identify who will be using the internet connection or who will be using the data connection. So random sampling is aimed to minimize bias by providing an unbiased population representation. So each member has an equal chance of selection. So reducing the risk of systematic over or underrepresentation. So it helps to mitigate the selection bias and provides a fair basis for the generalizing finding in that particular population. So that's the end of my presentation, which is the random sampling. Thank you.
So for my topic, I am going to report about non-random sampling. So what is non-random sampling? Non-random sampling technique where the sample selected will be based on factors such as convenience, judgment, and experience of the researcher and not on probability. So it is more likely different from random sampling and non-random sampling. It is because random sampling is based on the probability while non-random sampling is not based on probability. It is based on convenience, judgment, and experience of the researcher. So biases involved in non-random sampling. So non-random samples are biased in nature. So why it is biased in nature? It is because non-random samples often result in biased samples because some of the members of the population are more likely to be included than the others. So for example, you want to study the popularity of plant-based foods among undergraduate students at your university. So for convenience, you send out a survey to everyone enrolled in Introduction to Psychology courses at your university. So they all complete it in exchange for course credits. So because of this convenient sample, it is not representative of your target population. So people who take this course may be more liberal and drawn towards plant-based foods and than the others at your university. So non-random sampling is more likely based on the factors. So As what I've mentioned earlier, non-random sampling are based on factors such as convenience, judgment, and experience of the researcher, but not on based on probability. So, what is probability sampling? Probability sampling refers to the selection of a sample from population. So when this selection is based on the principle of randomization, that is random selection or chance. So how do you use probability sampling? So this sampling method involves dividing your population into smaller groups and known as clusters, and then you then randomly select individuals from these clusters to form a sample. So cluster sampling is typically used to study large populations or those that are geographically dispersed. So what are the representation of population in non-random sampling? In non-random sampling lacks the representation of the entire population. It is because in non-random sampling, the sample does not represent the entire population. The variation is called sampling error. A sampling error is a deviation in the sampled value versus the true population value. Sampling error occur because the sample is not representative of the population or is biased in some way. So that is why the population sampling error occurs. So, is there any chances or probability in non-random sampling? No, there is zero probability can occur in non-random sampling. It is because in non-random sampling it is not based on probability unlike in random sampling. So what are the disadvantages of using non-random sampling? So non-random sampling unlikely to be representative of the population studied. It is because non-random samples are extremely unlikely to be representative of the population studied. This undermines the generalization and validity of your result. In non-random sampling, samples are at risk of several kinds of research biases, as some units in the population have no chance of being included in the sample. Undercoverage bias is likely. Furthermore, since the selection of units included in the sample is often based on the ease of access, sampling bias is common as well. So while the subjective judgment of the researcher in choosing who makes up the sample can be advantaged, it also increases the risk of observer bias. So moving forward, if there are advantages, there are also advantages. It does not require a sampling frame. So in non-random sampling does not require a sampling frame, so your subjects are often readily available. So this can make non-random sampling quicker and easier to carry out. And then allows you to target particular groups within your population. So in non-random sampling allows you to target particular groups within your population. In certain types of research, it is vital that certain units be included in your sample. So for example, many kinds of medical research rely on people with a specific health issue. So although it is not possible to make statistical inferences from the sample to the population, non-probability sampling methods can provide researchers with the data to make other types of generalizations from the sampling being studied.
The type of non-random sampling, convenience sampling. It is primarily determined by the convenience to the researcher. This can include the facts like ease of access, geographical proximity, existing contact with the populations of interest. So, convenience sampling. Convenience samplings are sometimes called accidental sampling because they happen to be nearby the researcher is conducting the data collection. For example, you are investigating the associate daily shopping patterns to collect insight into people's shopping patterns. You decide to stand outside a major shopping mall in the area for a week, stopping people as they exit and asking them if they are willing to answer a few questions about their franchise. Second, a snowball sampling. It is used when the populations you want is hard to reach or there is no existing database or other sampling frame to help you find them. So, snowball sampling is research about social marginalized groups such as drug addicts, homeless peoples, or sex workers often use snowball sampling. They conduct snowball sample to start by finding people who use to a certain product or experience in the area you are interested. In these cases, you are also use network of people to gain access to your populations of interest. For example, you are studying homeless people living in a city. You start by attending a housing advocacy meeting, striking up a conversation with a homeless woman. You're explaining the purpose of your research and she agreed to participate. She invites you to a parking lot service as a temporary housing and offers you to introduce around.
Now, I'm going to elaborate what is qualitative research is all about. We all know that it has two types of research method. The first one is qualitative and the second one is quantitative. But I only focus in qualitative research. So now, I will going to define what is qualitative research. Qualitative research is a process of naturalistic inquiry that seeks an in-depth understanding of social phenomena with their natural setting. It focuses on the why rather than what of social phenomena and relies on the direct experiences of human beings as meaning-making agents in their everyday life. It involves collecting and analyzing non-numerical data, text, video, or audio. Now, I'm going to show you the most common qualitative methods. So the first one, observation. Observation is recording what you have seen, heard, or encountered in detailed field notes. For example, I will give a scenario that define what is observations in qualitative research. So in the classroom setting, if you have, if I have a classmate that always not present in the class, so I will observe and I will create a hypothesis like why. So that is observation. So the second one is interviews. Personally asking people questions in one conversation. So in qualitative research, it is very important to ask personally. So the third one is focus group, asking questions and generating discussion among a group of people. So when we say qualitative, it doesn't mean that it only involves one person, but it involves a group of people discussing each other. So the fourth one is the survey, distributing questionnaires with open-ended questions. So when we say open-ended questions is like the respondents must answer not yes or no, but it must be statement. And lastly, the secondary research is collecting existing data in the form of text, images, audio, or video recordings, and etc. And that would be all. Thank you.
To continue, survey research, often called as quantitative research. It is called quantitative research because answers to questionnaires are typically coded into numbers. For instance, the answers yes and no. The answer yes can be assigned as number 1 and the answer no can be number 2. Pretty sure that as third-year students, we are aware because currently our research studies are mostly quantitative research. On the other hand, qualitative research involves extended observation and or in-depth interviewing. Example is when physicians or doctors conduct in-depth interviews with their patients. Qualitative research can be more effective over quantitative research since it requires not just a simple yes and no answers but also the whys and hows of the problem. But that does not mean that quantitative research is not applicable to the medical field. Both quantitative and qualitative research have their strengths and weaknesses. For example, theory building is done in qualitative research while theory testing is done with quantitative research. So, from that, we can conclude that both research methods are applicable to the medical field. Again, what is the difference between qualitative and quantitative research? One of the major differences is that in qualitative research, the researchers conduct in-depth interviews to really know the situation of the respondents, unlike in quantitative research that can be answered only with a yes or a no, which sometimes limits the respondents' responses. Quantitative research focuses on the statistical analysis, while qualitative research focuses on the whys and the hows of the issues at hand.
Okay, so here are some of the examples or the common areas of qualitative research in medical sociology. So number one is patient experiences. Qualitative research in this area may involve in conducting interviews or focus group discussions with patients to understand their experiences with illnesses, their healthcare providers, and of course their institutions. So researchers can explore how social and cultural factors shape the patient's perceptions, decisions, and interactions with the healthcare system. Number two is healthcare providers. The experiences and perspectives of healthcare professionals can uncover the challenges, dilemmas, and social influences that impact healthcare delivery and decision making. Number three that we can talk about on medical sociology is all about health inequalities. Researchers can explore the social and determinants of health and of course their impact on access to the healthcare and health outcomes. Number four is healthcare organization. Studies may examine the organizational culture, structures, and dynamics of healthcare institutions. Researchers investigate how these factors influence the quality of care, patient-provider relationships, and of course, the healthcare policies. Number five is the health policy and advocacy. Qualitative research can also delve into the realm of healthcare policy and advocacy efforts. Researchers may study the narratives, strategies, and challenges faced by individuals or groups making or working to improve healthcare access, quality, and equity. Number six is, of course, the illness narratives. So these are all about the personal stories and tips related to coping with their illness experiences and diagnosis that can be analyzed by the researchers. Seven is the medical ethics. Ethical dilemmas in healthcare are explored through qualitative research. Researchers investigate the moral reasoning of healthcare providers, patients, and families when facing difficult medical decisions. Number eight, alternative and complementary medicine. So these are all about the therapies, the patient's motivations, and their experiences with non-conventional healthcare practices, and that can be a good qualitative study. So number nine is the end-of-life care. So these are the social and emotional aspects of end-of-life care, like terminally ill patients, families, and healthcare providers that can be investigated for qualitative research. And lastly, the last example that I have is the health behavior and health beliefs. Researchers may use qualitative methods to understand the cultural and social factors that influence health behaviors, such as smoking, exercise, and other dietary choices.
In continuation of our topic, now let's proceed to experiment and research method. Experiment is a procedure used under controlled circumstances to find undiscovered consequences or law. This is to verify or test the theory or provide an example of existing law. Also, it is a method of data collection designed to test hypotheses, which commonly used in laboratories with a common goal of eliminating threats to internal validity. For better understanding, experiments are scientific tests in which you perform a series of action and carefully observe their effects in order to learn about something. Experiments are widely used in different fields, most importantly in psychology, also in
biomedical
research. Are you familiar with animal testing? Animal testing refers to procedure performed on a living animals for purposes of research into basic biology and diseases, which assessing the effectiveness of the new medication such as cosmetics, household cleaners, pharmaceuticals, and industrial and also agricultural products. So in doing some experiment, these are the three groups. First is experimental group, second is placebo group, and third is the control group. The experimental group receive the treatment whose effect researchers wish to study. The second one is the placebo group. The placebo group is given a chemical that resembles the actual medication but does not contain any actual medication. A placebo is a substance with no chemical effects, not like an experimental group. The last group is the control group. The last group does not receive the treatment. The comparison of the experimental group and the control group is the control group doesn't receive anything, not like the experimental group. After the experiment, the researcher assessed the three groups. And when the experimental group performs better than other groups, it's reasonable to assume that the drug or the medicine had a favorable impact on this final result.
So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Joshua and I will now continue to discuss the experiments as research methods in medical sociology. So as mentioned by Michael, experiments are much more common in the fields of psychology and biomedical research rather than in sociology. It is because experiments do not easily lend themselves to the kind of topics that medical sociology studies. So, surveys and qualitative research are much more commonly used in this field of study. And I think it is because medical sociology, by its definition, it studies social causes of health and illnesses and the operation of the healthcare system. Thus, it generally recognizes that health and illnesses have social causes, and also to determine why some people are healthier than others, how and why healthcare operates the way it does, and the interventions to improve health and access to quality healthcare. Now, I have Joshua here to give you an example to further understand why experiments are not commonly used in medical sociology.
So, good evening, everyone. To give you an example, I want to cite that if a medical sociologist wants to study the effects of poverty on health, it would be both unethical and impractical, to say at least, to randomly assign some subjects to be poor and some subjects to be wealthier, and then to monitor any changes in their health for the next several months or years. So, as we analyze, in the given example, it is not feasible to conduct an experiment because it is impractical to monitor their health, since society is full of diverse status, and putting them into isolation would be unethical. And of course, one thing to consider first before conducting a research is feasibility. Therefore, it is better to conduct it in a survey and qualitative way. However, researchers in various fields have conducted some very interesting experiments on important topics in medical sociology. And I will be giving back the floor to Roslyn to continue the report.
Thank you so much. Now, in this one very influential study, according to Schulman et al. 1999, physicians were shown a video of either an African American or a white patient of each sex complaining of heart-related symptoms, and then asked whether they thought that the patient should receive certain procedures to test for heart problems. But in reality, the video was staged, and each actor was reporting identical symptoms and also using identical gestures. However, physicians viewing the African American actor were less likely to recommend cardiac procedures than those viewing the white actor. And those viewing the female actor were less likely than those viewing the male actor to recommend the procedures. Now, these results suggested possible racial and gender bias in this particular aspect of healthcare. So, the said experiment shows that there is discrimination among race, gender, or even status in accessing the healthcare. Because regardless of the severity of your illness, if a physician has a bias on whom to treat or ignore, and unfortunately you belong to one of the minorities, then you are one of the underprivileged to access quality healthcare.